Good afternoon, everyone. How's your afternoon going so far? Everybody good? Wonderful. Well, welcome to this session. My name is Peggy Clark. I'm with the Aspen Institute. I'm so delighted to see all of you here today. Some of my very favorite people in the world are here in this room. You all are all imagining the future together, and this is going to be an amazing deep dive. I want to tell you that we are looking at the question of what is a portrait of a healthy community? And I think we all kind of know this intuitively, what it feels like. And one thing we know for sure, it is not just the absence of illness, but it's the conditions where people can really thrive. So it can mean something as simple as a place for your children to play, or opportunities for leadership, clean water, food that is healthy. So what you're about to hear from this incredible group of panelists we have today is ways that they are reinventing the question of what is a healthy community. And they're very different from each other. The very first person I'm going to introduce to you is a surprising person who's taking on this question of healthy communities. Her name is Vita Davison. She was one of the leading thinkers in the information technology movement many years ago. And I think the title of her book will tell you a little bit about how long she's been working on these issues. She was the founding chairman of ICANN, which stands for Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which I think was at the very beginning of the information technology revolution. She wrote the best-selling book, Release 2.0, A Design for Living in the Digital Age. She's a leading futurist and thinker, and at a certain point she began thinking of this question of what was happening to our communities across the U.S. and has tackled that. I heard Esther speak at a session and was completely moved by the work that she's doing with The Way to Wellville, which is a new adventure that she's launched on, and it's a 10-year-old nonprofit that is devoted to helping communities to thrive. So Esther, we're really delighted you're here with us. Welcome to the stage.
You're the best. Great. So, good afternoon. Let me see. I can see the time clock. Great. Peggy asked me to first start out, where do I see my slides? Okay. By explaining why someone with the bio she gave that seems to have nothing to do with health is taking on this question of how to help communities to thrive. So not only did I do all this tech stuff, before that I studied economics in college, and then I was a fact checker for Forbes magazine. There's nothing better than that to ask good questions about why things work. So in 2007, I had sold my business and became an angel investor and got really interested in healthcare. It seemed somewhat more meaningful than things, this was premature, but like Uber for shoe shines or stuff like that. But I began to wonder, why are we spending so much money on care, which is net expenditure? It really shouldn't increase the GDP to spend more money on healthcare, instead of investing in health, which is an asset. It's that resilience that enables you to resist drugs or not catch the flu or not get nervous. And I began to think somebody should not run an experiment, because we actually know how to do this stuff. We know about prenatal child care. We know about mental and behavioral health. We know about building resilience. We know that the right kind of stress, which we call exercise, produces health, and the wrong kind of stress damages people. I was about to give a talk sort of like this, saying somebody should do that. And then I realized, oh, well, okay. In 2013, I announced that I would do this, and the rest of what I'm going to say is more or less what we are doing. The first is it's local. So these are the 5 places. Yeah. And if is anybody here from any of those, just raise your hands. Okay, 1 or 2 hands, great. In 2014, we put out a call for applications for communities to become part of what ended up being called Wellville. and we got 42 applications. My CEO and I, Rick Brush and I, went and visited 10 of them, picked 5, and here they are. And here is really what we were trying to do. This is a pretty word-heavy slide, and I'll run through it quite quickly. But the fundamental understanding here is that it's not about a single program. There's so many things you need to do to create a healthy community. But to jumpstart it, you need to do 1 or 2 things extremely well. And then that sense of capacity and agency, that sense in the community that we can do this, as opposed to, you know, things suck here and the good people leave. That's the difference. So a national nonprofit project, not a continuing foundation, but a project to show what it looks like if you do these things. And our mission is to scale by having people copy us rather than scaling ourselves. Real world evidence, multi-sector teams. You have to have the different people in the community working together. What we do, we provide a single advisor to each of the 5 communities, and we help. So we don't give them fish, we don't teach them to fish. We help them build their own fishing schools so they can build their own capacity to do these things. And we do that through helping them find partners with expertise, helping them find funders, helping them develop programs that actually are worth funding. There's not really a shortage of money, there's a shortage of effective spending of money. And they also, to our great delight, learn a lot from one another. And so we get them together once a year, the leadership of each community, face to face. And we also have a monthly phone call with all of us on the phone and so forth. And they commit to build strong teams and multi-sector collaboration, which is challenging. It's probably the least replicable part of what we're doing. But if you see that other people have done it, it gives you the incentive and the inspiration to do it yourselves. Target outcomes that matter to them, not that matter to a nice white lady from New York, but there is a fair amount of overlap. Use data and stories to measure progress, and share what they've learned along the way. So this is a chart developed by my wonderful CEO, Rick Brush. And I won't go through the exact formula here, but it's not simply randomly trying to do stuff. It's thinking purposefully about how you set your goals and measure them. Evaluation, both along the way and at the end, is key. And then turning that into stories that will inspire others. The value is both economic value, healthcare savings, economic productivity, the fact that you have fewer people getting addicted and going to jail. This is obviously not a 1-year return. As I mentioned, it's a 10-year project and it will go on beyond that. And just, you know, from my point of view, it's the kids graduate from high school, the mayor gets reelected, the real estate agents are swamped. And here you can measure things very specifically. Every diabetes prevention program is going to be a person-level aggregated measurement, and then there's the kind of overall community measures that matter. These are the stories, some of them we hope to tell in 2024. This is Muskegon. Anybody who wants these slides, Oh, thank you, yes. I'm just looking at my slides up here. I'll share them with you if you email me. The most important thing, honestly, is what we have learned. So, first of all, we started as a 5-year project, and as we got into it, we realized both how slow it was, but also how deep the impact would be over time. And I felt more comfortable. It's funded by me. Our part is funded by me. The community's efforts are funded through a combination of government, philanthropy, we hope social impact bonds, stuff like that. But it's now a 10-year project ending in 2024. Fundamentally, what I've learned is it's all about timing. it's everything from the children who grow up in insecurity, high rates of child abuse in our communities and others like them across the country. That makes everything really difficult, because if you have that insecurity and lack of trust, you've all, I'm sure, heard of the marshmallow challenge. The kid who eats the first marshmallow he sees, he's not a stupid kid. He's a kid who's being trained that you might not get the second marshmallow. Why should you believe that experimenter? So grab it while you can. And eat whatever food you can find, healthy food, and your parents don't have time or money to get healthy food. So it creates a mindset that doesn't trust the future and that's focused on today. So that leads over time to poor performance in school, to addiction to drugs, to a cycle of teenage parents who then create the same troubling environment for their children. So what I believe is that short-term desire is addiction and long-term desire is purpose. But that's true not just of children, it's also true of the communities. These communities, they were doing things, but in a sense they were addicted to pilots. Pilots are an addictive substance, just like anything else that can be good but can be bad. Cell phones, some things are just bad like heroin, but cell phones, food, whatever. So you do these pilots and it feels good, but there's very little long-term impact. And what we're trying to do is knit what used to be pilots back into a social fabric that will be persistent and produce long-term results well after the 10 years that we're there. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the other guys.
Thank you, Esther. I think we forgot to tell people what were the 10 communities that we're working in for Way to Wellville. And so if anyone wants to get more information from Esther, we can. Great, it was there. Okay, excellent, wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Esther. And Esther was very humble, but she was a huge pioneer in the information technology, and she really has done a lot for communities across the U.S. So our next speaker is an incredible person who is a hero of mine, Garth Graham. For those of you who've been to Spotlight Health before, he has completely knocked the socks of everyone who has heard him speak in the tent. He's the president of the Aetna Foundation. He's deeply, deeply committed to the complexities of a healthy community, social determinants of health. And he's a passionate hero for all of us in terms of how race and place and inequities exist for all of us and what we can all do about it. But Garth, every time you come here, and I'm always begging you to come, I learned so much from you, and thank you for being with us again. I know you really had a difficult time getting over the mountains, but he's here now, and Garth, we're delighted to welcome you to the stage.
Thank you, Peggy. Set the bar incredibly high, but thank you anyway. So I want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. This kind of work, people normally say this is business, not personal. For me, it's the opposite. This stuff is deeply personal. I care about this as a method, not just for what we do in communities, but it has a lot to do with my own interesting kind of early life experiences. So I'll give you an example. When I was about 17, 18 years old, I was running in our community. We were, a bunch of guys were playing and we were horsing around. And the next thing I know was, whoop, fell to the ground. Woke up, seconds later, there were a whole bunch of cops around me. Now, you have to understand, I'd never been hit before. My parents had never hit me. I had never been in a situation where, I'd had physical contact. My wife will tease me about this. I was kind of a nerd and did very nerdy things. And the very first time I was hit, it was by a police officer. And when I woke up that morning, that afternoon, I was in cuffs and didn't understand what was going on. I was disoriented. And I came to and kind of figured out what was happening. They're asking a bunch of questions. Then he kind of released the cuffs and said, "You can go now." No explanation, didn't understand what happened. Being a little bit overly introspective, I went home. I was confused, lost, couldn't understand. And I went to my mom, who, those of you know when I talk about these issues, she has been my teacher and lecturer for a number of years. And one of the things she said to me, and this has to go with where we're going to go with this talk, was don't let them take your power away. And the issue here, when we understand how we build healthy communities in local communities, the crux of what we're going to talk about here is how do you empower local communities to make change? Because a healthy community, a healthy local community, is an empowered community. Now, I got to tell you, for that day, for those couple of hours, actually for a number of days to weeks, I felt like I was a different person after that experience. And it took my mother's guidance to guide me back to turn anger into progress, and has inspired me to do this work. I think about that experience probably once a week, and that was many, many, many years ago. And it's because it was such a disenfranchising experience initially, and then understanding how it empowered me and how it empowered a lot of the work that I do in terms of making change. So we often start off with this concept of all healthcare being local. And I'll tell you another thing. If you forget anything that I say today, one of the things I want you to remember is we have to start defining disruption, not what occurs on mobile phones and electronic health records. Innovation is more than what's happening in doctors' offices and what's happening around ICD-9 codes or ICD-10 codes. It's about what's happening with families, individuals, and local communities. And the statistic I always like to go to when we think through this issue is a statistic looking back in Boston. And this ties to kind of my own life story and how we think about moving forward. So this is going up and down the Red Line in Boston. I used to train at one of the hospitals here, and if you take the Red Line at the top of a back bay and you go down into Roxbury, you cross a number of zip codes and you go from 91 years life expectancy to about 60 years. To give you a sense of what that means, it means that you go back about 100 years in time. 60 years was the life expectancy in the United States in 1915. And when you go on the Red Line, you go literally 100 years back in time in terms of conditions, in terms of people being disempowered, people feeling disenfranchised, people feeling as if they are not worth it, and understanding what are the kinds of things we can do to make communities do the kinds of things that they want to do. Not to come into there and tell them what they should do, but understanding how do we empower communities to do the kinds of things that they want to do. And where we lived, we weren't looking for heroes. We might have needed support for our vision to become a reality, but we weren't looking for the government or a big company or something to come in with the answer. A lot of times we knew what the answers were. When you look at these communities that are 100 years behind, there are a lot of folks within those communities that understand what the issue is. And it's up to us to help them define that roadmap further. When I had that experience that I mentioned to you earlier, that was a disenfranchising experience. The flip side of this is how do we empower people and allow them to be the masters of their own decision-making and the masters of their own universe, quite frankly. So this slide, if you forget anything, I always used to say to my medical students when I was in academics, you don't need to get on a train, a bus, a plane, and then another train, and then take a rickety old, a rickshaw down into some community to understand what's happening in third world conditions. There are third world conditions right now in most of our urban communities. There are people living, this is lower than life expectancy in Haiti, okay? So understanding that this is the city of Boston, much like what we would see in New York City, much like we'd see in many other places across our country. So fast forward into kind of what I think are some of the issues. Another kind of issue I'd say, it's not just all economics. People are feeling disenfranchised as part of all communities, and I think that's been part of keep going, and I know you guys in the back are working on it. So what are the kinds of things that I think define and allow us to understand what's a healthy community? These kinds of things, healthy food, safe outdoor spaces, education, walking and access, these are all components of the kinds of things that make people feel empowered. And the one thing I want you to take away again from this message, and my mom taught me to be repetitive because she was repetitive with me, that's the only way I'd learn, was that empowerment is the key. All healthcare is local. There are no national health numbers. They're all local numbers that build up to a national story. So if we want to tell a better national story, we need to start by telling a better local story. We need to bring people back from 1913, 1914, 1915 into 2017 and 2018. The ways we do this are by these kinds of methodologies, but they're all about in terms of bringing and building local health. When I think of innovation, I think of, another quick thing I want to tell you. So we did this interesting project with US News and World Report defining counties across the United States and the health of these counties. And what you'll see in many cases, unhealthy counties are located very close to healthy counties. So we don't need this huge kind of geographic divide to understand where the challenges are. I gave you the red line example, but that again is similar to what we see here in Monera and Madera County, where you see huge differences in opportunities. Tazewell and Peoria County, again, huge difference in opportunities in counties that are juxtaposed with each other. Some of that driven by economics, some of that driven by other things. So Peggy wanted us not to talk about the problem, talk about the solutions. And so would my mom. And my mom started back that day when that incident happened to me. She heard the story, and she said, you know what? This is the reality we live in. You have to move on. And I did not move on, I'll tell you, initially. But she taught me this concept of empowerment in terms of moving on. So how are communities moving on? Well, I said before, I give you an example of kind of what's occurring with the opioid epidemic. This is an example of what we see in Florida, where when people present into the hospital, a lot of times they get discharged without any social support. So there are folks within working with the Florida Alcohol Drug Abuse Association and others that are connected. They said that you only have 720 minutes, meaning just the length of that hospital stay when someone has presented with an overdose, to connect them with the kind of social support that would be meaningful. And so they're doing those kinds of things. We're seeing other examples, for instance, in Camden County, in New Jersey. This is amazing. When I learned about the Camden Smart Initiative, I was blown away. Whenever it rains in Camden, in certain areas in Camden, sewage backs up into people's homes. You think about conditions where I said where people live in challenging conditions. This is this is New Jersey, just so you know, okay? So what they looked at there was how do you redirect some of the water flows, and how do you work with the sewer system and the ecosystem to actually direct that water, that sewage, so that it actually goes into urban gardens and farms. And then how do you use that to actually build healthier spaces? So turning a negative into a huge positive. That's concept of empowerment. They've been empowered to make change and have done amazing things in terms of what they've done with both water. I'll just tell you that I don't think innovation comes in the form of technology. I mean, quite frankly, I had a BlackBerry for a long time, so maybe not the one to talk. But this is what they're doing in Mecklenburg County. I find amazing. Connecting pastors and churches to bring the message of healthcare. 96% of the folks that are connected in these congregations are making healthier decisions. Again, it's not tied to an app. It's not tied to a specific program. It's tied to people. And technology and some of these other things we use are tools that we can use to make communities feel empowered to be healthy. And if it is the churches that make them feel healthy, then that's an innovation. And that's as big as innovation as blockchain is, because it's building a healthy community. And so we have to think about this concept and broaden what we think of concept, that it doesn't have to be new and exciting, it just has to be impactful. Last example, Peggy, so I keep us on time. Last two examples, so that I keep us on time, is in Kansas City. So violence, urban violence, a huge issue. Kansas City treating it like a disease. Looking at how you use de-escalation tactics so that you don't end up in a homicide or other kinds of situation. Much like how if you're treating diabetes, you start to treat the hemoglobin A1C or the blood sugar when it's early, not when they start to have neuropathy and other diabetic complications. What's the kind of end thing I want you to understand here? People in local communities are doing amazing things in our country. We face huge challenges. There's vestiges of segregation that have people living, like I said before, in very challenging situations. But there is a cadre, there is a whole world of leadership. We need to understand that those folks are innovators. As long as they're continuing to create change in their local community, you, I, all of us who have positions where we can recognize them need to reward them appropriately. Thank you.
Garth, I would have liked to meet your mom. That'd be great. I think we really like her. She'll have to bring her back here. Wonderful, Garth, and we'll have a chance to hear from all of these guys in a few minutes. Our next speaker is surprisingly, he's a banker. His name is David Eriksen. He's the Director of Community Development Department at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. And some of you may not know, but it is one of the most innovative Federal Reserve banks in the country. David and I realized that about 20 years ago when I was working in economic development, David was really in the front lines of doing innovative investments in low-income communities across the U.S. And he's authored over 20 books and publications around issues like what counts, harnessing data for America's communities, how you strengthen the financial future of families, what matters, investing in results to build strong, vibrant communities. And when we had our conversation before we got you to come here, David, and I realized we had a lot of people who have been working on the front lines of investing in low-income communities for years. And then also when David showed me his slides, he has a picture of LBJ. So I said, anybody who's going to take us back to the war on poverty is a friend of mine. And David, we're so delighted you're with us. Welcome to the stage.
Thanks very much, Peggy. My friend Maggie Superchurch, and it sounds like that's an awesome name, right? Superchurch. But she was just Maggie Super married Bruce Church, so it's not that interesting really. But Maggie Superchurch has this really provocative question. She says, why is it that I can invest in a company that makes a pill that lowers blood pressure, but I can't invest in a neighborhood that does the same thing? And that's really the focus of this talk, is going to be, I think, we are soon going to be in a situation where you're going to be able to invest in neighborhoods to improve health, and that's really what I want to talk to you about today. And I'm going to have to stand close over here so I can see my slides, because this is a new presentation, and it's summarizing a 500-page book, and I have 9 minutes and 19 seconds to do it in. But I wanted to start with this quote because the road to getting to the point where you can invest in a neighborhood really involves a partnership with the community development sector, which is a sector you may not be that familiar with. But in a book we did years ago, Risa Lovizo-Mourey, former head of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, wrote this quote: "We are likely to look back at this time and wonder why community development and health were ever separate sectors." Right? And so what is community development? Well, one thing it isn't is this. These are sort of failed programs of the past, whether it's public housing, the projects, urban renewal. This is not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is a network of public and private entities that are investing into low-income communities. One of the things they do is invest in affordable housing. These are two examples, both in California. The one on the left is in Poway, which is in San Diego County. The one on the right is, the one on the left is for families. The one on the right is for people who were formerly homeless, the Plaza Apartments in San Francisco, California. The Plaza Apartments has medical offices, mental health offices. It has caseworkers to help those who are formerly homeless sort of get their lives pulled back together and sort of rebuild those lives. The community development sector, since the low-income housing tax credit was passed in 1987, this have built almost 3 million homes that look like this. You'd be proud to have your mother live in these. And it has been a huge investment into low-income communities. And you see the title here, community development is in the zip code improvement business. We think about, more important than your health, than your genetic code. Here's an example. Community development invests in kids. They invest in charter school facilities. They invest in daycare centers. Community development invests in local economies and small business and generating jobs in local communities. Here on the left is an example from, it's for the Neighborhood Centers, Inc. in Houston. And one of the things that's interesting about this is you'll see there's a Chase Bank here, there's a credit union here, there's also a legal office. This is a community that was formerly, all their financial services were met by payday lenders and check cashers. And on the right, you see that's a commercial development in San Diego, California. Now, that project it says resident-focused economic development. So this is, community development is always done in partnership with the communities it serves. And so here's an example where most of the people in this area of San Diego are from southern Mexico. They're very proud of their Mayan heritage. And for those of you who have had a chance to visit Palenque, the Mayan ruins in the Yucatan Peninsula, you'll recognize that motif, that architectural motif, or that Mayan motif is being incorporated into that community. There, in this community is also a bank in what was formerly an area served by predatory lenders. There's a grocery store here in what was formerly a food desert. Now, community development, here's LBJ for Peggy. Community development has its roots in the war on poverty, although it doesn't really get up to speed. It doesn't really start making its big contributions until about the 1980s. But what's interesting about that period is, and I don't know if this slide's kind of confusing, I think, but with the 1960s, what was really remarkable about the war on poverty was this moment where there was a very sophisticated understanding about what the needs were of a low-income community, the needs where you could disrupt what was going on in that place and turn it from a place that was harming health to one that was promoting health. And it required if you read these reports, they just sing, they're so eloquent and nuanced. They talk about how social exclusion is the product of multiple overlapping social exclusions. And Bobby Kennedy has this great phrase where he said, what you have to do is go in and grab the web whole. You have to, if you're going to turn that neighborhood around to something that promotes health, you have to do all these things at once. Health, education, job training, community empowerment, affordable housing, all these things have to be done at once. The problem is it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to do that all at once. And so what came of the aftermath of the war on poverty was what I call sort of the great siloing, where everybody kind of went back into their respective areas. Those who may remember, the federally qualified health centers had a philosophy based on what they called community-oriented primary care, where you adopted the whole neighborhood as the patient. That was abandoned. They became medical offices. Those of us who did community empowerment really got into the real estate business. I showed you all those beautiful buildings, but that's really what we lost, the community empowerment piece. And what I'm trying to show here in this 1990s era, there are efforts at trying to sort of get these different sectors to come and partner again. But what we're really driving towards is somehow taking that 1960s vision and then welding all those shards back together again into something that's more of a cohesive whole, so we really can grab the web whole. It's big. The community development sector is big. It's about $150 billion invested every year in low-income communities. It's done through a network of organizations. They're community development corporations. The first one was the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation in New York City, but they're about 4,000 now. So wherever you live, you are near a community development corporation. They are another important player are these nonprofit banks, the community development financial institutions. There are for-profit and nonprofit affordable housing developers. This is funded a lot through the tax code, interestingly enough, many tens of billions of dollars through that mechanism, and block grants and other funding mechanisms. The big driver, though, and this may be surprising to you, is bank dollars. These are depository institutions that are motivated by the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977. So it's big, but it's not big enough, which is part of why we partnered with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to do a series of conferences at Federal Reserve banks around the country. And we get people together who do community development, anti-poverty work, together with people who do population health, public health, medical care. And we get these people together and they work to try to figure out how they could come up with these new partnerships in their area. And there's lots of momentum around this idea, and it's very exciting. So I'm going to just skip through some examples here where the health sector is investing with the community development sector to improve neighborhoods, to make them more health promoting. Here, the Dignity Health, it has a $300 million loan fund where they're investing in partnership with these nonprofit banks to improve communities across the country. This is an example of the Children's Museum in South Phoenix that has really been the anchor of the revitalization of that low-income neighborhood. Another example is the Healthy Futures Fund. The Healthy Futures Fund is a collaboration between Morgan Stanley, the Wall Street Bank, the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, one of these nonprofit banks, and the Kresge Foundation. And it's an effort at trying to bring that John Castle sort of community-oriented primary care concept back into the financing system. In order to get access to this below market rate capital, you have to adopt the whole neighborhood as your patient. Here is a clinic on the ground floor There's housing above, 200 units of housing, 100 units for people who are formerly homeless, 100 units for families. There's job training on this site, and it has access to public transportation. They've adopted the whole neighborhood as the patient. This is another example where the ProMedica in Toledo is partnering with the Local Initiative Support Corporation with a $45 million partnership to invest in their communities around the hospital to improve them, to improve health. This is Maggie Superchurch's effort, the Healthy Neighborhood Equity Fund. This is, again, banks and hospitals investing, in particular around new transit stations in the outer Boston area that are experiencing gentrification and displacement as a way to make sure that the residents of those places can benefit from the improving conditions around them. That's good, but it's not good enough. We're trying to come up with new ways. We're proving that there's these places we can build something of a business model around this idea of investing upstream on the social determinants of health. And at root, what we find is if we were to do that, and in this market, I think there are buyers of people who are willing to pay for better health outcomes. There are sellers or producers of health, and there are the connectors or the tool makers, the people who connect the buyers to the sellers. And in each case, what we're trying to do is grab the web whole. And when we look at examples where there has been really great progress in turning a neighborhood that had 80% bad outcomes to begin with, and after the intervention has 80% good outcomes, we find that they have all of these elements. Trusted buy-in from the community, cross-sectoral intervention, place-based, data-driven. They have some sort of a community quarterback, something like the integrator that Don Berwick talks about. But we also find they have two other elements that are always necessary for them to be successful. They have to be spearheaded by a charismatic super genius who has a close friend who's a billionaire. So we want to reverse engineer the billionaire and the genius. Geniuses are everywhere, and there's plenty of money. And the plenty of money comes from in this buyers category. We spend $1 trillion on the downstream consequences of poverty every year, and through our social service system. We spend $1 trillion on chronic disease that is absolutely the byproduct of living in a dangerous, toxic stress environment, a low opportunity neighborhood. Every year we spend that on that chronic disease. What I'm trying to figure out is how do you spend those $2 trillion a year on the upstream social determinants of health? And I think about this to make it concrete. It's hard to figure out how to do that in those big numbers, but if you think about just like the island of Maui in Hawaii, Kaiser Permanente now owns all the hospitals there. They have 50% of the population are policyholders. They kind of own the downstream medical care cost risk, and they're starting to talk to preschools and go upstream. And that's the kind of way the buyers, the community development, we can spend that $2 trillion on producers of health. Well, who are producers of health? Well, being born at term and to a family that's ready to take that baby in is critical to your future health. That means nurse-family partnership is a producer of health. Engaging a young brain and having it develop the way it should be means that preschool teachers are producers of health. Reading at grade level is a best predictor of future health. Therefore, a tutor is a producer of health. So here you see where I'm going with this, right? If you have an adult outside of your parents who care about you, the research shows that you have a much better likelihood to have a healthy future. Therefore, big brothers, big sisters are producers of health. The Dream Cafe is a producer of health, right? So these are ways in which we can find ways to get the buyers to spend money on the producers through tool makers or connectors. So population health business models are one way to do this. So in the Maui example, Kaiser is motivated, but we can find lots of little Mauis all over the country where somebody owns the downstream medical care cost risk, whether it's a rural county that only has one health insurer perhaps, or some other, maybe there's a company town, but there'd be lots of little Mauis around the country. And there's lots of ways to connect them. Here are some tools that we can talk about that I don't have time to talk about, but there's Pay for Success, social impact bonds, prize-based philanthropy, advanced market commitment, social impact guarantees, investment tax credits. All of that's pointing to this idea that there's these twin revolutions going on. One is outcomes-based financing, where you pay to have for an outcome like Ready to Learn at kindergarten, not a Head Start slot, right? So we're trying to repurpose that $1 trillion I mentioned before in social service spending. We're also trying to figure out how to spend that $1 trillion we're spending on downstream chronic disease that we can avoid if we make the investments upstream. It's all summarized in this book. It's called Investing in Results. It's available at investinresults.org for free. That's your tax dollars at work. That's it. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. I love that. Your preschool teacher is a producer of health. And then the framing you gave us is so beautiful, grab the web whole. So there are many people in the room here that are trying to do this work, grabbing the web whole, the pieces of the web. And I am just overjoyed to welcome our next speaker, Vita Davison, who is an incredible powerhouse for Visioning the Future. She's executive director at Food Lab Detroit. She is really a force of nature. She is re-envisioning and reinventing communities, and we all have so much to learn from her. And Vita, I'm so happy you're with us. Please.
Wow, that was fantastic, guys. Thank you so much, and thank you to the Aspen Institute and Ideas Festival for giving me the opportunity to come and talk about my hometown, Detroit, Michigan. Detroit, I want you guys to know, is a powerhouse of urban agriculture, and there is no doubt that Detroit's future is one where our entire food system is going to be community-based. It's going to be one where growers and chefs and restaurateurs and food entrepreneurs are building this collaborative network that integrates sustainable food production, processing and distribution, consumption at restaurants, and waste management. And we're doing this in order to enhance the environmental, economical, social, and health detriments in the city of Detroit. But here's what I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen. There is absolutely no way that you can begin to understand why Detroiters are so motivated to build a community-based food system without understanding Detroit's past, and why Detroiters are so motivated to never let this happen again. Let me take you back to 1950. In 1950, Detroit was the world's industrial giant. With a population of almost 2 million people, Detroit had 140 square miles that was dedicated to land and infrastructure to support this booming Midwestern city that was at the center of the automobile industry. And now, today, a half a decade later, Detroit is the poster child of urban decay. Detroit's population now went from 2 million back in the 1950s to our current population, which is under 700,000, of which 84% are African American. And as people and wealth left the city for the suburbs, the Detroiters who stayed, some by choice, some by necessity, had fewer options for employment and entrepreneurship, and ultimately, fresh food. In fact, I want you guys to know that due to the deep depopulation of Detroit, it led to the gradual closure, if you can imagine this, of every single full-service chain grocery store in 2007. Detroit, Michigan had no full-service grocery store. And that meant that Detroiters had to rely on convenience stores, dollar stores, gas stations, and fast food restaurants. A study told us that 80% of Detroiters use these kinds of outlets to meet their food needs. But Peggy, I didn't come all the way to Aspen, I was just in Aspen for Southwest, but I didn't come all the way to Aspen to Ideas Festival to tell you this story. I came here to tell you the story of resilient Detroiters, of the resiliency of the citizens in Detroit, like Baba Malik Yakini, who've come up with radical ideas to ensure that Detroit, Michigan, my hometown, becomes the most inclusive, the most food secure, the most healthiest city on planet Earth. And I would argue that Detroit, Michigan is best positioned to serve as the world's urban exemplar of food security and sustainable development. I'm gonna tell you why. It is because Detroit has some very unique assets. Detroit has a lot of land. Expert tells us that the entire city of Boston, San Francisco, and the borough of Manhattan can fit in the land area of the city of Detroit. They've also estimated that 40 square miles of Detroit is vacant. That's a quarter to a third of the city. That's a level of emptiness you will not find in any other big city. So here's the thing. In Detroit, we have fertile soil, proximate to water. We have willing labor. There's a desperate demand for healthy, fresh food. We have local citizens who've banded together to create over 1,500 urban farms and gardens in the city of Detroit. And we have neighborhood-based food entrepreneurs with the help of philanthropy that have begun to create healthy food products and healthy retail outlets. At Food Lab Detroit, it's a nonprofit organization where I serve as the executive director. Our diverse community of food businesses, there are over 200 of us. We are organized under one common goal, and that is to create businesses that will help a city to realize the fact that it does not matter one's ethnicity, one's income, one's zip code. It should not hamper their ability to eat fresh food, to live on safe streets, and to find good quality jobs. So here's what I want you all to do. I want to show you what it looks like when you support local efforts that use food as a tool to improve health, catalyze economic development, lift up cultural expressions, and create co-benefits specifically for low-income residents and families. In a city like Detroit, where far too many African Americans suffer from diet-related illnesses, restaurants have an important role to play in improving healthy food access. 5 years ago, Kirsten and Erica discovered that a vegan diet would help them avoid the health problems that ran in their families, like diabetes, high blood pressure, and cancer. So Erica and Kirsten, at first, they sold one-off meals, and then they started to make deliveries in person, and then they started catering weddings and other events, and in 2013, 5 years ago, they opened their first restaurant and named it Detroit Vegan Soul. So yes, we have a vegan soul food restaurant in the city of Detroit. The restaurant is located in the city's West Village neighborhood, and it was a residential area that was dotted with vacant storefronts. Today, 5 years later, Detroit Vegan Soul has 50 employees. They hope to break $1.5 million in revenue this year. And just 6 months ago, Erica and Kirsten took this old ice cream shop and they transformed it to this, their second location in Detroit. Pioneering again another Detroit neighborhood with no healthy dining options. They're working on their third and their fourth. And if y'all lucky, maybe Detroit Vegan Soul might come to Aspen, Colorado. So in the United States, we know this, guys. We know that U.S. farmers receive about 70 cents on the dollar. Middlemen and distributors, they take about 83%. We know that food travels long distance from farm to table, on average of 1,500 miles. So Kiki and Rohani, two entrepreneurs in Detroit, they began to work with the landlord of this building, and they opened the Farmer's Hand. The Farmer's Hand is a hyper-local market that allows local farmers to drop off their products once a week, and the farmer receives not 17%, but they receive 80 cents on the dollar for their gross sales. The Farmer's Hand currently works with over 100 producers selling produce, dairy products, wine, grocery items, artisanal products. The Farmer's Hand was so successful that they opened up a sister restaurant right next door called Folk that is open 7 days a week, that serves brunch and coffee and ice cream. And Kiki and Rohani do this all in service of abiding by this philosophy that they want to support local businesses, they want to support a local food system, and they want to do that by building strong relationships with their customers. Here's another example. You guys have heard of these fancy farm-to-table restaurants, yeah? Yeah. Have y'all ever heard of Table to Farm? We do this in Detroit. And so at Oakland Avenue Urban Farm, it's the largest urban farm in Detroit North End neighborhood. I've collaborated with them to do what we call grown and made table to farm dinners. And for the dinners, we bring folks onto the farm to share a communal 5-course meal. The farmer and the chef co-create the dinner together. And when the diners arrive on the farm, they're given a farm tour. They're also provided plenty of time and opportunity to talk to the farmer who grew the produce and the chef who's going to prepare the meal. Our goal with these dinners is to change people's proximity and their relationship to food. We want them to know who grew their food and where their food came from. Another example of a Food Lab member business that is focused on community, Good Cakes and Bakes. April Anderson built her business with the emphasis on community. She offers ethically produced baked goods, but beyond baked goods, April also offers her bakery as a community gathering space. People regularly meet at Good Cakes and Bakes. They have community meetings and they do fundraisers. And every single employee of Good Cakes and Bakes is a youth. It is a young Detroiter that lives in the community. The Thomas family is another example. They have been in business for 28 years, building a strong community over in the Brightmoor Old Retford neighborhood. And they go well beyond just serving good food. They too have regular community meetings. They have support groups for grieving women. They have natural hair festivals, and they showcase local artists. Now, I've heard some fantastic examples today, and I've heard some fantastic examples while I've been here at the Ideas Festival. And I know that there are many efforts and initiatives taking shapes in cities all over the world to strengthen their local food economy. But I'm gonna tell you guys what makes Detroit special. It's the many creative and intentional ways that we are bringing people together. We grow together. And that means that our farms and gardens are places that are building social cohesion on top of providing accessible food options. We also manufacture together by using what's called shared use kitchen spaces in communities all over the city of Detroit. The residents of this Brightmoor neighborhood, they purchased this building that was in foreclosure and disrepair. Neighbors, as well as volunteers, took down those gray, bulletproof glass protectors. They cleaned up the grounds, and they turned the building into this, which is a community kitchen. And also, it is a cafe now where local food makers can also make product, and they can sell their products to the residents. There are all types of community shared use kitchen spaces in Detroit. And I'm gonna give you an example of how we do it in Detroit. When the farmers grow apples, we make fresh pressed smoothie drinks. When farmers grow produce, we take the produce, we mix it with some ginger, and we create tasting vinegars and cocktail mixes. When farmers grow green tomatoes, we turn it into my old favorite Southern relish that's called chow chow. So here's what I want to tell you. We're a long way from succeeding in Detroit. And I'm not going to claim that we're going to solve all of Detroit's challenges through urban farming and food entrepreneurship. Detroit's still struggling. But I love this picture, not because it's a picture of myself, but I love this picture because I'm standing in between Detroit's past and Detroit's future. I love this picture because it reminds me that out of the ashes of the industrial and financial crises in Detroit, Detroiters are creating a strong sense of place and community through food. And we're seeing that it's more than just an economic growth strategy. In Detroit, we believe that in order to create a sense of place, in order to create a healthy community in a way that bridges racial and economic divides, in order to foster a place of positivity and inclusivity, and to create change with community voices and the community's health in mind. It all starts with healthy, accessible, culturally appropriate, delicious food. Thank you.
Wow, isn't that awesome? Davina, next time we're going to have you bring all that sweet potatoes and green juice, and it looks so delicious, so wonderful. I'd love to invite my speakers to join me up on the stage. Thanks. Right, great. Yeah. Great, perfect, thank you. Wonderful. Aren't we so lucky to have them here? Let's give another round of applause for these guys. Thank you, thank you. So I am so delighted we have so many people in this room today, and I want you to be thinking about what questions you want to ask, because I want to make sure we give time for that. I do want to just give a shout out for a minute to some of my dear friends in this room, Linda Resnick and Lori Tisch, who are in the front lines of working on this issue in their own communities that they're working in. Lori just did a wonderful panel, was about her report. What's the name of that report? Sorry. Thank you. Healthy Food and Communities is fantastic. So we are creating a web here at Aspen, which often happens. I want to just start with a question, and maybe it's too simple of a question. But Garth, when you talked about that community right next door, where the average lifespan is 91, and then just a few counties away, 58 years, that difference, how can it be that there is such a level of health disparities in this richest country that is seems to be so invisible to so many people? So I really want to get a feeling from you, and you have been working on this issue for a long time.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that led to that. There is a history of where people ended up living. In fact, David Williams, a researcher out of Harvard, says that we're no more desegregated in 2018 than we were in the 1960s.
That's right.
Wow.
And so he's published this interesting paper looking at segregation index and just showing that as a country, we really haven't moved past in terms of where people live over the past 40 to 50 years. So that's the backdrop of all of this.
I want to make sure everyone heard that. We are no more desegregated now than we were in the 1960s, did you say?
Right.
Wow.
So that's David Williams' work. I want to definitely give David from the Harvard School of Public Health recognize some of the work that they've done there. And the whole concept there in terms of what's happened is that people continue to live in situations that are many ways, like I said, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years behind. And so as we move on, we start to leave people behind. And as we've continued to move on, those folks get even more left behind. So how we've ended up in the situation we are in here today is a combination of understanding place-based care, but also understanding as well, with your earlier point, where our investments have gone.
Right. No, that's really important. Can you speak to that? Why is this still an invisible issue, these huge disparities that we experience?
So it's interesting. I mentioned those 40 meetings that we have with, where we're trying to bring the health people together with the community development people. And one way we like to start those meetings is we use these heat maps to sort of identify things that might be interesting to the sort of the anti-poverty people and what might be interesting to the health people. So we'll be in Los Angeles County and we'll look at things like overcrowding in housing, unemployment, poverty rate, and certain neighborhoods will light up. And then we'll look at something like prevalence of childhood obesity or chronic disease or violence or some other issues, and certain neighborhoods light up. And everywhere we go, those are the same map, right? Those are the same map. And what we need to do is figure out a way to disrupt that cycle because the status quo, frankly, is stupid, unfair, and expensive. And by investing upstream to make sure that every baby born, my husband's a pediatrician, he talks about how all babies are born with bright eyes, right? And the trick is to keep them engaged, challenged, nurtured throughout the life course so that they keep those bright eyes. He says, I don't need to look at their labs. I know when they walk in the door if that's a healthy kid or not a healthy kid. We know how to do that. There is nothing that we don't, none of this is something we don't know how to do. What we don't know how to do is build a business model to pay for it. And that's something that I think we're on the verge of figuring out.
That's a really interesting point.
Can I take that?
Yeah, please, Davida, jump in.
Yes, because this is, I would be remiss if I did not lift up and acknowledge the role that government and policy plays in keeping neighborhoods segregated. And I'm gonna tell you 3 examples in terms of how this is played out in the city of Detroit. And I am afraid that Detroit is not alone. I am confident that this has happened in cities where you have predominantly black and brown bodies that occupy these cities. The first one is the systemic and institutional racist practices that happen at banks as it relates to housing. There was a situation, and I encourage everyone to look up something that's called the 8 Mile Wall, where in the city of Detroit, a wall was built that separated white neighborhoods from black neighborhoods. Why? Because they would not finance mortgages in the black neighborhoods. But once this barrier was built to differentiate the two neighborhoods, white homes got mortgages and were able to get financed, black homes or not. The second thing was something that was called this urban renewal kind of project that happened, where highways were driven right through African-American neighborhoods, mainly through our central business corridors, in the name of urban renewal or development, and dismantled and destroyed our neighborhoods. Robert Moses was notorious for doing this in New York. And I think a third thing that keeps our neighborhoods segregated and separated as well as it relates to policy is the fact that I think, and my father was deeply affected by this, how it can affect generation and generation and generation, is the GI Bill. Mm-hmm. Do you know, Peggy, African-American soldiers weren't able to get GI Bills when they came home from the war like white soldiers? I did not know that. And the GI Bill helped soldiers to build a foundation for their families so they can pass on generational wealth from one generation to another. So if we're not addressing systemic and institutional racism in our own country, we're going to continue to perpetuate these segregated neighborhoods.
Absolutely, beautifully said. I want to open it up to everyone, but I'm so struck by what you introduced to us, this notion of the web, and the beautiful quote from JFK, you have to go in and grab the whole web, grab the web whole. And Garth, you and I talked about this from years ago, this idea of the social determinants of health, and what you talked about, David, and what you talked about, Esther, that in here in your work, Garth, you're doing peace grants, in one community. Another community, you're doing addiction. Another community, you're doing community development. Another community, there's real estate. And there's many in this room who've begun these initiatives. Rich Besser, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, AARP is doing a whole issue on livable communities. So there seems to be a group of people that are trying to rebring this notion of the web back into our consciousness. And it feels to me harder now to do, because it is true in the 60s, we used to talk about empowerment and community empowerment, and it's in a different place. So I just want to know your reflections on this notion of you have to go in and grab the web whole, which seems to imply you can't just work on health, you can't just work on common space, you can't just work on education. It's this complex set of things. Anybody want to jump in on the question of the web?
Yeah, so fundamentally in our communities, we find, as Dave called them, silos. So I asked the people doing early childhood education in Spartanburg, so what are you feeding these children? And they said, oh, we don't do nutrition, we do education. And and that's, I don't want to pick on them, that's just one example, but getting the different institutions to work together and to understand that if they're successful, they're going to help us.
Right.
And if we help them, it's this interaction. Anybody knows you need partners, you need.
Right.
One thing we learned in Silicon Valley from all these incubators is you need to have partners, you need to have resellers, you need to have marketers. All these things work together, and you need some critical mass of them, and then it becomes easy. Right now, we've got a critical mass of things that destroy health. And we need to just turn one or two in the other way, and then you'll get a positive impact, and they'll infect one another.
Right.
There is a momentum growing, to your point, to others, around social determinants of health. And the policies of that have created challenges in the past, keep it back to my mom, gives us the opportunity to talk about this issue.
She's with us. The mom's back. Good.
She always talked about challenges and opportunities. We have some deep-seated challenges, but right now we're at an interesting moment of time where we can create more and more opportunities if we ride this wave of momentum, things that are happening in Detroit, because we're seeing it all across the country. People are standing up. They're not waiting for, the big government bill to be passed. They're standing up to try to deal with some of those issues. So I think we need to figure out, again, how we kind of elevate those efforts and discussions, much like we did today.
Right, excellent. Let me ask if we could bring up the lights, not only because I don't want you all to fall asleep with these amazing speakers, but we bring up the lights because we're going to turn to the audience in just a minute. Does anybody else want to jump in on that question of grab the web and what you mean by that? Davita, you're on.
Yeah, you all say web, we say ecosystem, as it relates to food. Listen, there was a reason why Food Lab Detroit exists. It is because we believe that food sits at the intersection of so many things, and we can use food as a tool, as a weapon to address so many challenges, environmental, economical, and social. So when you say grab it by the web, we look at what we call the entire ecosystem. And at Food Lab, one of the jobs that I am responsible for doing is to think in what we call design thinking, right, terminology, or what we call systems thinking. I want to know that if I am able to help businesses launch, operate sustainably, and scale, if I can do that, is there another challenge that I could fix simultaneously by doing that? I'm thinking about the entire system. But I don't care what web you're grabbing, I don't care what ecosystem that you are forming, if you are not centering the people who are most directly impacted by the problem that you are trying to solve, let the web go and grab another one and start all over again.
All right, let's open it up. Questions? We have someone with a mic. Where is that person with the mic? There, right there. And we've got a couple. This one right here will be our first, and then this one right behind you. Please just say your name and where you're from.
Dr. Nicola Ciso. I live in Aspen,
Right.
founder of Aspen Talks Health. And I'm curious, I love the table to farm, that's genius. Were there any other techniques to help people transition from being addicted to unhealthy food to craving organic, healthy produce?
Great.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start and I'll let other folks jump in. And one of the points that you made, Garth, in your presentation is about how you look at technology. And for us, technology for us is humans. It's people. And it is amazing when I look at campaigns that has transformed behavior. Two that come straight to mind, and I talked about this with a couple of folks in the conference. When I see somebody smoking, I'm like, really? People still smoke? No offense to smokers, but I'm like, who does that, right? And it is because, do you know how much money and effort and marketing and campaign and education and conversations and branding was put into Stop Smoking campaign. Another campaign that I love to lift up is Meatless Mondays, right? There is marketing efforts. So why is it when I'm in my community or in my neighborhood and I too am trying to transition folks from eating that unhealthy food to the craving of organic or locally produced healthy food, I'm fighting fast food restaurants. I'm fighting party stores. I'm fighting convenience stores. And you know what they're marketing? The sugar, the salt, the alcohol. I wish I had the same amount of money that some big brand companies had to market and to educate folks in my communities and neighborhoods about healthy eating, but I don't. So we got to do it old school way, girl. We go to the ground. We use churches. We go to door to door. We're in our farms talking and communicating. And you know our main influencer in our communities that help transform people's taste? Children. Because children influence their parents. Children can say, you know what, Mom, I'm craving a fruit or a vegetable, or I don't want that, I want this. And so it is an ecosystem that involves private and public partnerships. It involves schools, it involves hospitals, it involves food businesses and retailers as well, all singing the same song and communicating the same talking points, that you either gonna eat healthy now or you're gonna pay for it later.
So I want to just, you're a really hard act to follow. I want to put in a plug for what we're doing in Muskegon with the Diabetes Prevention Program, which is a CDC-approved curriculum that you can make more alive with good coaching. And so the YMCA is delivering the CDC program. It's classes and follow-ups, and you learn how to cook, and you learn how to eat with your family, and develop a taste for healthy foods, and so forth and so on. And the thing that's exciting is not just that Muskegon got a grant from the CDC to prove that this works, and is figuring out how to get funded ultimately by Medicaid and by private insurers and so forth. But also, even though within Wellville we're trying to go deep and dense, this is a way for spreading our impact across the country much more quickly, because the National YMCA is beginning to pay more attention. This is, I think the ultimate business model in some form is going to be franchised things like the Nurse Family Partnership, which I wish would scale.
Right.
And anyway, you got
No,
the
that's a great point. Also, Kevin Washington is here of the National Capital Y, so he's a great speaker.
Yeah, ask
there
him
was a
about it.
question right here. I'd like to take a couple questions so we have room for everyone to get engaged. So this gentleman right here, and then someone else in the back. I think I see you right there. We're going to call on you next, and then the gentleman in the pink. Please, sir.
You guys are all amazing. And Vita, I want you to come and work for us.
It's
I
sitting
hear-
next to her feels really good, just so you know.
I hear all of you talk about 5 pillars of renovation of these communities. It's nutrition, it's safety, it's plenty of funds, and it involves education. We work in the field of education in the urban areas, and we see a lot of money going in and more of the same coming out, and terrible results in the schools. I think that I would like to hear from each of you, what are you doing to possibly make, what is the proper word that we're using, to total change in the education system?
That's a great
Disruption,
question.
a disruptive
Excellent,
change.
disruption. And this woman right there in the back who I can see, or was that a gentleman? There you go. Please, sir.
Of course.
Stand up.
Hi, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
My name is Ewoma Agbaldo. I'm a recovering college graduate. Just graduated from Columbia University. And I'm working here with the Society of Fellows. With everything that you've been talking about with social determinants of health, one thing that came to my mind is environmental injustice. And a very big thing, like while I was in New York, one thing that I noticed was that a lot of the bus depots are disproportionately located in Harlem, Washington Heights, and the Bronx, and other things as well. And my question is, what can be done to address this environmental injustice, because it's very much so related to everything that you guys have been talking about, especially with food and whatnot.
Right. We're getting question webs, education, environment, and Fred, I think that's you in the pink shirt. Pass the mic.
I'm going to say something I never believed I could say, but Davita, you should run for president.
yes.
Because you turned Donald Trump into mincemeat.
Oh, my goodness.
The first person I've seen that could just tear him to shreds.
Daddy's been trying to get me to take over his church. Now you're talking about
There you go.
going for president.
There you go.
You can probably tell I'm a preacher's kid. So.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate
it.
the gentleman right behind Fred and with the hand up right there. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, okay. She said, stand up, I'll stand up. Hi, my name is Tyree Winters. I'm an osteopathic pediatrician, but I'm also a proud Detroiter.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm a
What up, though?
What up, though?
Yes.
I'm a Cass Tech, University of Michigan alum.
Technician.
But I wanted to ask specifically, and this is for the whole group, about transportation, because how you said before, how we had a food desert in Detroit. I grew up in Rosedale Park, so I could just easily get in my car because I was fortunate enough to have parents who had cars, to just go right over to Southfield and be able to go to a grocery store. But I couldn't get on a bus, on a Detroit public transportation bus, because it would not go past that 8-mile border, if you know what I mean. So speaking about transportation for everyone, how do you feel that plays into a part, especially with the issues that we have with disparity?
Great question. So we have the web right here of education, environment, politics, transportation. I'm going to turn to, will you accept the nomination that's coming from Aspen Ideas Spotlight Health to run against? But we'll give you the first word, and then let's open it up to the other panelists. You can take whichever question you like. Would you like to go first?
Wow, I really want to tackle Elliot's question, but I'm not, because it's going to get me in trouble, because I feel some kind of way between the resources that are going into charter schools right now in Detroit and not in the dismantling of public schools. So I'm going to leave that alone, because that could get me in
He's
into
hearing you,
trouble.
though. He's
Yes.
hearing you.
And the gentleman in the back that talked about the environmental racism that happens with communities of color. I would encourage everyone. John Carlisle just in the Detroit News ran an interesting piece, an award-winning piece about what happened to Delray. And Delray is a neighborhood in the city of Detroit that suffered environmental racism because there were piles of black coal that was built up into these particular communities. And I'm just gonna say this about environmental racism. And what I'm going to say is that as a director of a nonprofit organization, funders provide Food Lab funding to do entrepreneurial training, right? We do incubation and acceleration of food businesses. But the reason why Food Lab created a model to make it membership-based organization, because what I don't get paid to do is I don't get paid to movement build, but that's actually what I do. With the community of entrepreneurs that I work with, we are part of a good food movement. And it is so important to create a movement because when all hell breaks loose, you should be able to tap into your community of movement builders to go basically protest. And the reason why I say that is Jane Jacobson stopped a freeway from running through her community, whereas the Bronx didn't. There is power in people. And as long as we can mobilize when these things happen in our community, I believe that we can push back from some of the environmental injustices that are happening in our neighborhood. But we gotta organize and we have to be a community. To the gentleman who talked about transportation, you know the problem in Detroit. Do we have to talk about our home business? Your mama always said when, don't talk about the family's business in public, but should we talk about it? The reason why regional transit doesn't exist, the reason why you couldn't get on a bus in Detroit that could take you to Southfield or Farmington or all of these Tony neighborhoods in Oakland County is because they shot down regional transit in the city of Detroit. They didn't want black and brown people coming into the communities in their neighborhood. That's the reason why we don't have a transit network, is because other counties wouldn't partner with Detroit to make it happen, okay? And so let's talk about policies that prevent that. But transportation is a huge issue in the city of Detroit, and we have to have it. If anybody has talked to me over the weekend while I've been here or the last couple of days, y'all know I already have my little bus pass. Like, I've been on the public transportation. Let me tell you something, Aspen, you all just don't know. It's free, like mass transit here. I got my little Downtowner app on my phone. Like, I caught the little electric car from downtown, like right close to campus and walked. Like, this is beautiful.
That's great.
Like, y'all have mass transit like this. This is wonderful.
That's awesome. Garth, up to you. Let's go on the transport one as a vertical that tells us so much.
Quite frankly, transportation, education, and all of the challenges of the environment are all linked. They're all linked because education is funded based on a tax base.
Yes.
And things that if you live devalued homes, the tax base is lower, there's less revenue. All of these things have been and have always been linked. I started off with a discussion about desegregation because what it is, it follows a funding dynamic, and it follows a track record of where resources have gone. But what I want us to try to spend some time before we close, and I think you have offered us the opportunity to do this, is to we understand where history is, and that's important. We have to be very clear about what history means, because to ignore it will mean that our path forward is flawed. But now we need to start directing our path forward. We need to pick a couple of things and understand where it is that we can make a change. I will tell you that I 100% believe, and you've seen evidence of this today, that the core of change is already in local communities. We do not need to go in with any story or any idea. We need to build from the ground up. So we build in reverse and we invest in that way. That is the secret, I think, for moving forward. There are funders like myself and others in the room and others across board, which I think we all believe in that, and I think that's part of the movement. And I think that's where we need to go, is ground up is moving forward.
Yeah. That's beautiful, that's beautiful. Let me give David a chance, beautiful. Let me give David a chance to come in, you've been quiet. I also, since we are running out of time, I want each of you to make us believe in the possible. I want you to look forward a little bit and tell me for you what that's gonna look like if we're successful at this work together. David, but you may have wanted to go on something else first and then go to that.
We're short on time, so I would just say that I think it's totally within our power to end poverty in the next 30 years. Wow. Like, I just think it's achievable. It's too expensive to allow it to exist. And I think we're building the business models that are gonna help us do that. And I think, the cost of incarceration, the cost of chronic disease, the cost of the lack of trust, the cost of lost opportunity in terms of productivity and contributions to our society, the loss of ideas that are being lost because those brains aren't being developed, that is just too high. And I think we're on the verge, the breakthroughs that we're finding in, bright spots in local places, systems thinking that's happening in places like Wellville, the Way to Wellville local communities. And if we can operationalize that, I think we'll be much, much better off.
That's great. Esther, what's your vision?
Yeah, so I'm going to +1 what everybody said and wish I had said it as nicely. The one element that's also really valuable, and I'm thinking of them specifically in regards to transportation, is employers. Because they understand the need for their employees to get to work. They understand if they're retailers, for people to come to their stores. And yes, you need to build that community demand for it. And specifically in our communities too, there's a fair amount of segregation and lack of access. But it's the sort of thing that people are beginning to at least pay lip service to, and now it's the time to go and say, look at these patterns. This is what the community needs. But that's for food, for school, for work, for healthcare.
Right. Garth, you want to add your words on what your
Yeah,
vision is?
my vision is nothing in life is inevitable. That's what my mother, again, taught me.
Love her.
What I think we all need to do, including everybody in this room, because we all have resources, is be committed to change. I think we understand like I said before, what the past has been. We see a glimpse and a view of the future. And I think we all need to invest and commit to that and be true about that commitment. Not just where we articulate it in terms of nice words, but where it actually follows with our resources.
Beautiful. Davita, what's your vision?
Yeah, I'll tell my vision really quickly through a story through my goddaughter who lives in Harlem and who dances at the Harlem School of Arts and goes to an independent school in New York called Castlebridge. And at 6 years old, she called me on the telephone, Peggy, and she says, Mom, that's my goddaughter, she says, you gotta talk to my mother, I have a problem. And I said, Angel, what is the problem? Let me talk to your mother. She was like, she just doesn't understand. I said, well, what is the problem? She was like, I can't bring sugary, salty snacks to school in my backpack. I can only bring fruits and vegetables. I said, yes, of course, that's the rule at your school. And she says, well, I have these apples and oranges and I'm having a hard time moving them at the cafeteria table. No other children will swap with me. I said, excuse me? And she says, now, Castlebridge is an independent school in the city of New York where half the day is taught in English, the other day is taught in Spanish. So here you have cross-cultural young people and children going to school together. And I said, Angel, nobody will share with you or swap with you fruits and vegetables like apples and oranges? She says, no, you got to talk to my mom. I need like pomegranate. I need like kumquats. I need like kiwi. I need like, I need some, basically she needs like cultural appropriate, like sexy fruits, vegetables, like the kids want to try and experience. She's like, everybody is eating an apple or an orange. Like, geez, like she couldn't even get me like I don't even know, some kind of peach she was talking about. And I said, put your mother on the phone. And Stephanie has heard this story because I've told her about it. And so her mother gets on the phone and I said, what's the problem? I was like, it don't seem to me Angel has a problem. It seemed like you had a problem. She says, I do, because I didn't even know what the hell none of these fruits are. I said, you know what? We're going to work through this together. We're going to get on the internet. I'm going to show you some pictures. You're going to go to El Barrio on the east side of Harlem into a Spanish grocery store. I'm going to hook you up and I'm going to tell you what to get. That's what I want for all children.
Beautiful.
I want them to experience culture through food.
Beautiful. Okay, so I think I'm not alone in saying I believe in all of you guys, and we are with you and we support you. We're grateful for your stories you've shared with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.